Age categories were pretty normal-ish for me. What is happening? I should have taken this off because that's driving me nuts. Hi everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with July's wrap-up. So, July was an interesting month, as it has been in the past couple of months, where I didn't read as much, but it still wasn't my worst month of the year, which was good, and I read a lot of good things. I made some progress. I did some reading vlogs, so I did a reading vlog, and I had a lot of fun with it. So, I feel like there's not a whole lot to say about, like, I didn't do any readathons or anything fancy, so let's just dive right into the stats. So in July, I read 9 books, which was one more than June. So like I said, not the worst month of the year. I feel like the worst month, I can't remember what it was. I looked at it the other day. I feel like there were 6 a while ago. So like I said, I read 9 books, and that was over 2,782 pages and about 70.5 hours listened. And that was 4 audiobooks, 2 ebooks, 1 physical book, and 2 mixed. So a variety there, actually. Age categories were pretty normal-ish for me. We had 3 YA and 6 adult books. Genres, we had 4 fantasy, 3 romance, and 2 contemporary. And ratings, this is where it differs a lot. I had 0 5 stars this past month, which is weird, but I had 5 4 stars and 4 3 stars. So I still had a good variety of like books that I enjoyed, but I didn't have any 5 stars, which is the weirdest thing, honestly. So starting July, I started with a book that I was finishing from June, and that was My Killer Vacation by Tessa Bailey. This one ended up getting 3.5 stars from me. I read this in that like summer vibes vlog that I did. I'll leave it linked above. It's super short, but I was just kind of going for the feel of things. So let me know if you guys liked that vlog or not. But this is one of the books that I read in that vlog that was giving me like the summer feelings. This book follows our main character Taylor, and she is vacationing with her brother in Cape Cod. She is a teacher. I think she's a 2nd grade or kindergarten. I know those are very different, but I know it's younger kids. And so she's just kind of getting away. She's used her savings because her brother has been going through a hardship, and so she really wants to like be there for him. So they go on this vacation. They go into their rental house. They're very, very excited, and she finds a dead body, which throws a wrench in all of their plans. Because of the suspicious nature of just a couple of facts, she suggests that the sister of the guy who died, who is actually the owner of the condo in which they were staying, gets a private investigator. And so she does, and Miles, the private investigator, comes in. He's kind of like a bounty hunter, private investigator kind of person, and he owes her boyfriend, I believe, the sister's boyfriend, something. So he comes in to kind of investigate, and Taylor is like a sleuth. She loves those murder podcasts, all that type of stuff, and so she decides that she's gonna help him out. He's like, no, please, please don't. And it's a battle of wits between the two of them as they try to solve the whodunit of this murder mystery. So like I said, I gave this 3.5 stars because this is my first Tessa Bailey book. It is significantly shorter. Like, I knew it was going to be shorter, but it was really like, it's less than 300 pages, which is almost, I feel like, unheard of for contemporary books, contemporary romance specifically. This is more in the veins of like a novella kind of vibe, and because of that, it was just kind of okay. There was like no character development with these characters. I felt like things happened very quickly. There was not a lot of development when it came to like the murder mystery plotline. Like, I expected that to be a significantly bigger part of the story. And while it is a big part because it's how our characters kind of interact and why they've been forced to talk to each other, it is significantly a smaller portion of the story. It gets wrapped up very quickly, very easily. I feel like there's not a lot of like breadcrumbs that were left for us as the readers to solve the mystery with our characters. Now, I am terrible when it comes to solving mysteries, so like, if I notice that there wasn't a whole lot there, I feel like that's pretty obvious that there wasn't a whole lot there. So overall, the best parts of this book were the smut scenes, which is kind of what I expected from Tessa Bailey. I've heard that her writing is really good, but she's really good at smutty scenes. And so I knew that those were going to be good, and they were. Those scenes were the best parts, but I wanted all this other stuff with it. So I was kind of disappointed when it came to this book specifically. I feel like it was too short to accomplish what she wanted. I feel like she needed this book to be a little bit longer to do all the things that I wanted her to do with the character development and the plot development and things of that nature. So I'm still going to give Tessa Bailey a chance because there are books that she's written that I'm interested in that are longer, and I'm thinking that she's just not like, this story needed to be more than what we were given. So I think that she can probably do pretty well with longer things. So I still want to give her a chance. But this one, as far as like my very first Tessa Bailey book, was a little bit of a disappointment because I'd heard just so many good things. It was really popular online when it came out. I think it came out last year. It was really popular last year, so I'm assuming, yeah, it came out in 22. So a lot of people loved it and raved about it because they read other things by this author. And I just feel like this being the first one to go into was probably not good for me because I could see that there's a lot of stuff in here that would have made me give up if I couldn't pinpoint why I think this didn't work. So it was okay. Like, I still enjoyed it. Like I said, I still gave it 3.5 stars. There are elements that I enjoyed about the story, but it wrapped up very quickly, which, again, I think it all boils down to it was just too short and there wasn't a lot of things that were fleshed out in the way that I think they needed to be fleshed out. So this one got 3.5 stars, unfortunately, but it was still a good book. The next book that I read was actually another transition over from June. I technically didn't read it until the beginning of July, but it was supposed to be my June Lorraine Heath book, but that was Texas Splendor. This is the third and final book in the Texas trilogy by this author. It's her very first, I think, series. It's not her very first book that she ever published, but it's her very first completed series. And this one got 4 stars. I love this series. It is so cute. I love our characters. This is a really good series if you are someone who wants the historical romance vibe, but doesn't particularly want all of the smutty scenes. This does have them, but they're not as described, and they are significantly less of the plot, which is not true for some historical romance. The way that this author, I don't know how she does it, but I've noticed it with the first book in the series too, which was the very first book I ever read by her, and she has this way of like being able to make you care for these characters immediately, and she has this very like overarching romantic tone to the story where you just love your characters. And this book was just the last little check mark that I needed to tell me that this is going to be an amazing author, and I cannot wait to dive into more of her stuff, especially with this being a Western. And a lot of her stuff, I think she either does like Regency or Western books. There's like not really any in between, and I'm discovering that while I still don't think Western is my, like, I'm going to gravitate towards that all the time, I will give it a chance if it's certain authors that I enjoy. Like, I've read a couple of Westerns by people who I've never read anything by before and really enjoyed it. So if they can make Westerns good, then I'm willing to try things like, for example, Joanna Lindsay is an author that I love, and she does have a good amount of Westerns, so I'm willing to give them a chance. But I still don't, like, gravitate towards Westerns. But what I'm discovering is that it doesn't matter. Whatever Lorraine Heath writes, I will read, which is a good thing that we're doing a deep dive in all of her books because, like, she's great. She's just really good. So this book is, like I said, the third in a series, and this series follows 3 brothers. We have Dallas, Houston, and Austin. And this one follows Austin, who is the youngest. Now, when we met him in the very first book, I think he's like preteen, early teenage years. By the end of this book, we have a like gap in time from the end of the second book. I believe it's been 5 years, maybe 10 years. I can't remember what it is, but basically Austin's been in jail for a crime that he didn't commit. And so he gets out of jail and is kind of like reevaluating a lot of stuff. So there's a lot more to it than that. He went to jail for a woman, and then of course the woman has moved on since he's been in jail. And so there's that like little plot line. He finds somebody else in his life. He has always been around his family, and so the fact that he hasn't been around his family for so long and they've continued to grow, like he was always Uncle Austin, and so the little girl that was his cousin, that, or his niece, that he felt like was his little like pride and joy, has now grown up and has added all these other siblings who don't know him. And so there's moments like that that are really, it's an interesting look that I don't know why I've never thought of before, but I've never read a book where like someone has been in jail like this before. So to see him come out of jail and kind of reevaluate and be thrust back into a life that is different and the same. And then of course people look badly on him because people think he did the crime that he was convicted of. There's a lot to it. like that, and I just really loved it. But like the romantic elements of these books are so amazing because like these people will do everything for their women, and I just think it's great. So still not my favorite. It didn't get a full 5 stars. I think this is my least favorite of the series. I feel like the first one's still my favorite. I feel like I still enjoy Houston as a character the most, but I still really enjoyed this story, and it was still really great. And oh, it was so good. I'm sad to see it go, but like, I'm happy to see what else is next, you know? All right, so over the next like little bit, I did a reading vlog, which would have been, I think, the last video you saw in July. And I read a bunch of fairy loot books, finally. I purposely picked books that I was in the romantic, like fantasy romance vein, and things that I really wanted to read. So the first from that video was This Vicious Grace by Emily Feed. This one ended up getting 3 stars from me. This one was good, but not great. Like, it's been only a couple of weeks since I read this book, and while yes, I want to continue with the series, I think there's one more. I think there's only going to be 2 in the series, but I might have made that up. But there's at least one more in this that's coming out soonish, and I do want to read it because I kind of want a conclusion to this story based on some things that happen at the end of this book. I don't need it, you know, like I'm kind of happy with how this ended. I think it did kind of have a cliffhanger, but I've moved on. I've already forgotten is what I'm trying to say, is there's a lot of this story that I've already forgotten. So while I really enjoyed my time reading it, like when I was actively reading it, it was good. I think I gave it 4 stars when I finished it, and then I bumped it down to 3 afterwards because I've forgotten so much. It didn't feel like anything new, if that makes sense. Like I felt like another YA fantasy book. It was good, but not great is the best way that I can describe it. So I still enjoyed it. There was a lot about the story that was interesting to me. I loved the character development. Specifically, there's a lot of character development with some of our, yes, our main characters, but there's also like a side character that I'm thinking of that started off, you hated him, and then by the end, he was actually a sweetheart. So there's definitely some character development that I enjoyed. Let me tell you what this book's about. So we follow our main character, Alessa, who has this gift. Now she is called, I never can remember what the heck it's called. It's real bad. Finestra, I think is what she's called. And basically what that means is that like she has this power, and her power is to amplify her partner's power when like the end of the world comes. And so they live on this island that I believe is inspired by Italy. It has some Italian influences, I'm pretty sure. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure. And her goal is to find a partner, and they get married, they get paired up, and she can touch them and amplify their power to stop this big bad whatever the heck is going to come. The problem is that when she touches people, they die. And so she's had 3 partners, and the book starts with the 3rd funeral. And so she is just kind of distraught and is upset because, you know, she's not doing what she's supposed to be doing. Her powers are not acting the way she's been told they're going to act. There's like evangelical preachers in the streets telling them that she is going to be the end of days and they need to kill her. None of her guards are actually being guards to her because they're like, whatever. She's not actually what she's supposed to be doing. We should just not waste time on it. And so because of that, she goes out and finds this guy named Dante, who is basically like a street fighter, and asks him to be her bodyguard because she doesn't trust anybody because people are trying to kill her. So you have that. And at the same time, she's also trying to find her next partner. And basically there's special people who have magical powers, and those are the ones who can become her partners, but not everyone has magical powers. So instead of picking one person specifically, she invites all of them to her castle, her home, whatever it is, and she trains with them and learns about them for a few weeks. And then at the end of that, her goal is to get one of them to volunteer because she doesn't want to pick anymore. She's picked 3, and every time she's picked, it's ended badly. So she's hoping that someone will volunteer. So you have a bigger cast of characters because you do have all of these people who I'm forgetting their name, but they are the ones who are there to be partners. I believe there's like 7 of them or so. And then you've got her, and then you've got Dante, who's, like I said, her bodyguard. And so he is around her all the time. And because of that, she lets her guard down, and they have very real conversations and stuff like that. So that's really sweet. and then one of the kind of partners is the one that started off as a jerk and it ended up being super sweet, and you just kind of fall for all of them. So by the end, there's a lot of characters in this book that I really enjoyed, but the plot itself was okay. So moral of the story is that I read this one because I wanted to see if I needed to own the special edition of the next book. I do not. I just want to read it to say that I've finished the series and kind of know where it goes because I have questions. But this was the first one in that vlog, and it was okay. Another one, I'm doing all my 3 stars at the beginning of the month. Another one is one that I read. It's not marketed as a novella, but it's basically the length of a novella, and that is The Midwinter Mail Order Bride, and this is by Katie Wilde. I picked this one because, well, I did pick this one. It was on my TBR for July. My friend Taylor actually picked this one for me. She wanted to read it, and we have such similar tastes that she's like, you read it for me and tell me if it's worth it. And I said, okay. So this one got 3.5 stars. I read this on the plane to and from New York City, which if you guys have seen that vlog, I'll leave it linked above. But me and Lauren went to New York City, and so the plane ride was like a little over an hour, I want to say. So I was able to read it there and back. Now, we did have a huge layover, not layover, we had a huge delay before we went to New York, so we were on the plane for like 2.5 hours, and I read a bunch of it then. But I read this, and I have enjoyed it. The story itself is interesting. It feels very much like your normal fantasy plotline. I can't remember our characters' names because of course I can't, but our main 2 characters, also I can't pronounce them. I remember that being an issue because they were fantasy and it was just really hard for me to figure out what they were. But we have our main 2 characters. We have our main male lead, who is the king of like the 4 realm, like he's got his little realm and then he keeps adding to it because the king that was before him was awful and killed people and children and like was genuinely the worst person ever. And so this guy kind of came out of the rubble and killed him and took over. And so he's thought of as like a barbaric king, but people prefer him to the previous king. And so he's kind of on the look for a wife. He's not, but his advisor kind of put out the word that he's on the look for a wife. So you've got him, and then the story starts when our female, who comes from like 4 kingdoms away, like comes from like an ice kingdom where they have like magical powers, and she just wants her own kingdom because her parents are awful to her, and actually just everyone that she lives with, except for like one person, is genuinely terrible to her. So she just wants to get out, and so she goes there to be his wife. And so they get off on the wrong foot. There's a little bit of a miscommunication between the 2 of them of like, he interprets her reaction one way and she interprets his reaction a different way. So they're at heads, and so he basically says, fine, you don't want to be with me, I will take you back to your land. And so the whole book is them traveling back to her parents. So and through the course of that, then there's romance and stuff like that. So like the story itself is interesting, the plot is interesting. If you are afraid of spiders, don't read this book. Spider is a very large part of this plot. Because there's like this big bad spider that she's convinced is like going to hurt her parents. And so that's kind of why they're traveling back to her parents. He's going to help her out, but only she can see the spider. And that's where it gets a little iffy. Just be wary of that because like arachnophobia is like a real thing. And like, I'm not afraid of spiders, but I don't particularly love them. And there were moments in this book that I was like, why? So that's a side plot, but it was good. The writing left much to be desired. It was not the most amazing writing. They did have some good quotes here and there. Like I definitely highlighted some stuff in my book, but it was a Kindle Unlimited book, and I'm glad that it was a Kindle Unlimited book because I would not have even wanted to spend 99 cents on it, honestly. And I'm glad I read it because it gave me something to do when we were on the plane, just kind of waiting. It was my travel book. I really enjoyed that. It was the perfect length to be a travel book because I really finished it there and back. Like it was very, very quick. It was only 185 Kindle pages, which is even shorter, I think, than like a regular book. So it was super short, and because of that, there was a lot to be desired when it came to like character development and things of that nature. But overall, the plot was interesting, and I enjoyed it when I read it, but like I don't need to read anything else by this author. I don't need to read anything else in this series because it is part of a like standalone series where it's a bunch of like romances that just take place in the same world. And I feel like I don't need to read any more, although I will say I think they are by different authors. So, I mean, there's that if you want to try to read it. Basically, like, I had never heard of this book or this author, and I read it and it was just kind of okay. So it was good to scratch the fantasy romance itch that was still plaguing me very highly in July, but I don't know. It's fine. This is the best thing I can say is it was fine. I then picked up Divine Arrivals, which was another book for my Fairy Loot vlog. This is by Rebecca Ross. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed this. This is a fantasy story, but it's historical fantasy. So it feels very much like this book is taking place in like a World War II setting, but it has fantastical elements to it because the whole point, let me tell you what this book's about. So it takes place during a war between 2 gods, but that part is confusing because I feel like it's either not described very well as to kind of what happened, or like I just didn't process. Like, I think it was described because I do remember bits and pieces of like this mythology story that was being told throughout this book, and our main character is kind of like figuring that out as we go along, and I think that was a big part of it. But it basically sounded like there was 2 gods and one was ticked at the other one because the other one was asleep, but the other one, there's a chance the other one's not actually asleep. I don't actually know. So there's one god that's just like basically starting a war and like causing chaos to humans in the hope that the other god will show up, basically. So this book follows our main 2 characters. We have Iris and Roman, and they are both on the same newspaper. And so they're both competing to be the same columnist on this newspaper. Due to circumstances, they both end up being like put on the front line of this war. And so you see a lot of the casualties. Like, they do kind of go to the front line, but they're not on the front line for a lot of it. They kind of are a couple of towns away from it, but has a hospital. So during their downtime, while they're not writing their articles, they are doing things in this hospital and kind of like being nurses a little bit. So while they're also writing all these stories and trying to get, you know, what it's really like to be on the front line, that kind of stuff down. And then of course it's the 2 of them as they may or may not fall for each other. So the fantastical elements of this, yes, you have like this god that is causing chaos, and I think that there's going to be a second book, and I think that the second book we're going to get way more, just based on how this book ended, we're going to get way more fantasy elements in that book because of how it ended and just the direction I can see it going in. But there's also some fantastical elements revolving around their typewriters, and that was what was fascinating to me. I just really thought that what the author did with that plot line a little bit was just really interesting and not something I'd ever really seen before, I don't think. And then of course the romantic elements were really good. They didn't kick in, because you saw my vlog where I talked about this, like I was still kind of just like feeling okay at like the 75% mark, and then like the last 25% really kicks it up into high gear, and there is a big cliffhanger at the end of this. So I for sure will be reading the second one. I don't know if I'll get a special edition of it. It depends on what it looks like, because I really enjoy this one. It's really, really pretty, but I'm not sure I need a second one. Anyway, that's not important. I really enjoyed it. The story was great. I liked the elements, especially for someone like me who's not a big fan of books set in that like World War setting. Like, it's not set there, but that's the vibe that's given off. So if that's a time period that you enjoy reading about and you want to get into fantasy, this is a great book to do that, because the fantasy elements are so minimal and it feels like our real world with a couple of fantastical elements to it. So that's a time period I don't enjoy reading a lot about, and I really enjoyed my time with this one. I loved our characters. Really, the character development and the romantic plot line is what got me through to the end, because otherwise it was just going to be a 3-star, and then things happened and it became a 4-star, and I really enjoyed it. So this was great if you are a historical fantasy person. It's definitely not epic fantasy, but if you want to kind of try out fantasy for the first time, this is a great book to do that with. I then randomly picked up the 3rd volume of Fence, which I gave 4 stars to. This is my favorite edition or volume so far in this series, because we've now reached the halfway point. I believe there are 5 or 6. I can never remember how many volumes there are. There's 5 or 6 volumes in Fence, and we've now reached that halfway point. So the first 2 volumes were very, very similar, because you have this series basically follows a bunch of people as they are competing in a fencing team in college. And so our main two characters, one of them is Nick, and he is on a scholarship, so if he doesn't make the team, he can't go to that school. And then the other one, who I can never pronounce his name, so we're just gonna call him S, because that's how his first name starts with an S. He is like the best of the best, and they can't stand each other, and they become roommates in the very first book. And so he's kind of like, he can go to the school if he is on the team or not, but like he's so good that there's no way he won't make the team. And the team only has, I think, 4 or 5, 4 and an alternate, I think is what it is. The first 2 books were them kind of competing with each other. Like everybody on this who wanted to be on the fencing team were competing with each other. And by the end of the 3rd volume, we finally had the end of that competition and we had our team. And so now we're going into the actual like team doing things. And so there was definitely some character development between Nick and S in this book, or in this volume, and it was nice to see because there wasn't anything spectacular about the first 2. It was literally them just competing with each other, and you got a little bit of backstory with a couple of them, but like there wasn't a whole lot there, honestly. And if it had continued that way, I would have gotten bored really quickly, but there was something about it that just kind of like kept me reading, and I'm glad that I did, because this volume changed things, and I'm interested to see where we're gonna go. I have the 4th volume on my TBR for August, so I'm really hoping that I get to it, because I just think this series is fascinating. I don't know why, I just randomly decided to pick it up, and I don't do sports things, and I'm really enjoying it. So this one was great. I feel like there's not a lot to say about it because it's so short, but things are happening, and I'm excited to see where they're gonna go. And then the last book that I read for that Fairy Loot vlog was The Foxglove King by Hannah Whitten. This is an adult book. The other 2 were YA. This is adult. It got 4 stars. It's my favorite from the 3 that I read in that vlog. This one is perfect if you want like a fantasy book for the fall. Like this is a perfect fall book. We follow our main character, Lore, who in this world there is like, I think it's belladonna, but it's like this poison, and it's kind of like, it gives you like a high. And so in this world, it's what I envision the equivalent of like heroin is, because people get addicted to it, and then of course it goes way downhill and they will die prematurely. And so if you are living on the streets, then you don't get a lot of help, and you quite literally just like die in the catacombs. But if you live in like the Citadel and you are fancy and have a lot of money, then you can just like poison yourself every night, and then the doctors will take care of you because you have enough money to do that. So Lore was born in the catacombs and has this special magical ability to interact with the dead. Like there's this thing called like a mortum, something like that, and it's basically like death. She is a poison runner, and so she kind of is working with a couple people in the underbelly of the city, and some stuff goes wrong and she gets caught. And because of that, she's like, well, this is it. I'm going to die. But the king has other plans and wants her to spy for him. So he kind of forces her into court. So you've got her. Her objective is to get really close to the prince named Bastion. And then she's got a monk bodyguard named Gabe. There's way more to it than this. The interesting thing about this is I think that there's supposed to be a love triangle in this book. And I can see the potential for that love triangle to continue based on how this book ends. And it could become a really big thing. But with this book, the way that it is there's not really a love triangle. I think the author is like setting some stuff, laying the foundation for there to be a possible issue in the 2nd book, because there will be 3 books in this series. The way that it goes now is that there is clearly someone that she is attracted to. That is like a clear front runner, and then the other one is someone that she is not particularly as attracted to, but she cares greatly about and doesn't want to get hurt. So she cares for them, but more on like a friend level. And then there's like a clear front runner, I think. And I feel like with love triangles, there's not always that way. So I don't really know if it's a love triangle or not. I think that there's the potential for it to be an issue in the coming books, and I can see some things that could go down in the 2nd book. But I went on like a whole ramble about the love triangle. If you like to see it, it's in that vlog. But moral of the story is like, this was a pretty good book. There was a lot of the plot that sticks with my head, and a lot of the plot that was really interesting, and there's a lot of like court intrigue and them trying to figure out what's actually going on and who's telling the truth and who's lying to them. but then you've also got like the world itself is a little confusing because they rely heavily on religion in this world, and like religion is their history. It was very similar to like, I think, Greek mythology, where at the time the mythology is their history, it's their reality. Same thing with this, like the gods are a huge part of their everyday thing. Like the church in this world is like very powerful. There are elements of that I didn't quite understand, that I'm not sure, based on how this book ended, I'm not sure you're supposed to understand everything. I think there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that like we as readers don't know about yet, but like it was there. I have a lot of questions is what I'm trying to say. I don't think I'm doing a very good job of describing my thoughts on this book because I'm not quite sure what they are. I enjoyed my time. It is not my new favorite thing. Honestly, I'm hesitant to even call this a fantasy romance. It's a fantasy with romantic elements to it. But I still enjoyed it. It was really good. It's a beautiful, beautiful book, but I think I might have hyped it up a little bit too much in my head. I think that's the issue there. I then picked up a manga, which was Head the Sunspot, and this is by Yuki Fumino. This is, I don't quite understand. I read somewhere that this was the first book in the series, which I do think it is, but there's like a series and there are limits in the series, which are like add-on. I don't quite understand how it works, but I don't think it matters because I don't think I'm going to continue. This got 3 stars. I enjoyed my time reading it. It follows 2 friends, well, 2 guys who become friends. We have, I'm going to butcher these names, Tashi and Kohi. Kohi, we're gonna call him K and T. How about that? So K, he had an accident when he was younger and he is very hard of hearing. He can still hear, he has hearing aids, but he can read lips easily and he can hear certain sounds, but not always. He has to be looking kind of at you to be able to read your lips, and his hearing is getting worse. And then you've also got T, who is just needs money, honestly, and is struggling to find a job, and he stumbles across this guy who needs a note taker because classes are hard for him, so he needs someone to take notes for him because he can't always hear what's going on. And so they create this bargain where he will take notes for him in exchange for this guy basically bringing him lunch every day. So the ending is interesting to me. Here's where I'm conflicted, okay? I like the story. I like the characters. This is definitely a friends to lovers kind of situation. They start off as friends, and by the end of this, we start inching towards that possible romantic future for them. I don't want to own any of the other copies, but I can't figure out a way to read this online. Like, my library doesn't have them. Hoopla, I can't find them on my Hoopla. Like, I can't seem to find them anywhere. And I do want to continue because I'm interested in, I want to continue at least one more because I think I'm interested in their story. I like the representation that we get in this book, the deaf representation, because you don't get that a lot. Now, I do have another series, like a manga series, that does have a deaf main character as well. So I could get the same, I think, what I want from this in that story as well. So I might try that one pretty soon. I've got the first 2 volumes of that as well. So I liked that element because it's not something I see a lot. And I do like our characters, but a lot of this, I honestly was bored. Like, it was the last little, like, the last chapter. I think there are 5 chapters in this book, and I think the last chapter is the one that I was the most interested in, and that's because a romantic plotline started a little bit. And I will do anything for a romantic plotline. So if that wasn't there, then I don't think I would have wanted to continue. So that's where I'm struggling, because, like, I don't want to own them. Like, I don't want to go spend my money on a book that I'm only going to read once, and I'm probably not going to pick up again. Like, I'm most likely going to unhaul this book and give it to somebody else because I don't see myself ever reading this again. But I'm glad that I read it. I enjoyed the plot line, but there were, like I said, a lot of moments where I was just super bored. And at the same time, there was a lot of moments that I couldn't tell what was in someone's head and what was being spoken out loud. And I know that some points in this book, things were being spoken out loud, and our main character was missing them because he couldn't hear them. And so he would be like, what? And the guy was like, oh, never mind. And so they had those elements. But again, there was some very clear panels where I couldn't tell if that's what was happening or if our main characters were just thinking them in their heads. Like, I genuinely don't know what was said out loud and what wasn't. There was some moments where it was very clear what was said out loud. Like, I don't know if you can tell, but like you have dialogue or you've got text like this that's not in a speech bubble. That clearly was just like the narration or someone's inner monologue. So that was clear, but there were a lot of moments, well, like you see a lot of speech bubbles, but half of those are in someone's head. So I don't know. It was very confusing. So I was bored and confused for most of this book, and that's why I think I don't want to continue, but I do want to continue. So I'm having a struggle, but I'm glad I read it because I've heard good things. I actually, from a Frolic Fiction, really enjoyed this, and she and I have similar tastes in some things, but not all things. I'm thinking that manga might not be the thing that we agree on because she does like a lot of horror manga, and I do not do horror at all. And like I said, I do like the romantic elements of this, but that's about it. Like the story itself was just kind of okay, but it's the first in the series. I'm basically talking myself in and out of continuing is what's happening here. So I am glad that I read that, and I will pass it along to someone who can enjoy it more. And finally, the last book that I read in the month, after 2 months of not reading this / reading this, I finally finished The Recruit by Monica McCarty, which was supposed to be our June buddy read. Taylor finished this. I did not. Although we've both kind of hit slumps in different ways, so I think we're kind of pausing this buddy read for right now, which is okay. But I finally did it. I finally read it. So the weirdest part about this is that this got 4 stars. This is like my second favorite book in the series. And I reached, I think, exactly halfway point by the end of June or somewhere in June, and then stopped reading it. And then I eventually picked it back up at the very, very end, like the very last day of July. Technically, I finished this in the wee morning hours of August 1st, but we're going to count this for July because I spent a lot of my time reading it in July. Even with that like month break in between starting it and finishing it, it still became one of my favorite books, which is the weirdest thing because the main male lead we met in the previous book, and I could not stand him in the previous book, and I loved him here. I don't know. This series basically follows a bunch of Highlanders who are part of this secret guard by Robert the Bruce, who is the guy who's kind of trying to be the King of Scotland. Thinks that he is the real King of Scotland, and then there's the King of England who thinks that he owns Scotland, and so it's that conflict, which did actually happen in history. But this series is 12 books long, and we follow different people. This one, we follow our main character, Kenneth, who is the brother of the main female character from the previous book, which was called Viper? Saint. It was called The Saint. So the female lead in that one, this is one of her brothers, and he makes a stink through basically the entirety of the previous book. He and the main male lead who is the Saint, he and Kenneth do not get along. They are from feuding families. They've always hated each other, and in this book he's basically taking part in these games to be put on this Highland Guard. And so because of that, he's finally sent on a mission of his own, and due to that, he runs into this woman that he had a kind of like a one-night stand with. It's their story. It does kind of jump around timeline-wise, kind of like the previous books have, but that didn't faze me as much this time around. So I'm not sure why this story worked, because again, my favorite book in the series is the 3rd book. It's still been my favorite series. It's still been my favorite book in the series. Everything else in the series has gotten like 3 stars. Like there's not a lot of 4 stars in this series, and that one got 5. And the fact that this one got 4 stars, especially with a huge break in between, I think it's really interesting. But I don't know. I don't know why I enjoyed this so much, but I think I liked their relationship a lot. There's a lot of banter between it. Their love language is definitely bickering. So if that's your thing, this is definitely a book for you. I will say, without spoiling anything, there is a trope in here that is, I think, one of the most hated tropes in the book world, probably. I personally don't hate it if there's a reason behind it. And also, this trope is used when I have seen it in the past. It's always been used as a way to kind of wrap up the end of a story to make our main characters get together, and that's not really what happened here. Because of that, this trope did not bother me, but I'll happily tell you what it is if you want to know, and this book is interesting to you, but I don't want to say anything because I think it's a very big spoiler for like the middle of the book and how things progress from there. But I could see why that would turn a lot of people off. Didn't faze me. I actually kind of liked that was part of the story. I liked their relationship. I liked them. I oddly liked Kenneth, which shouldn't have worked, but it did. We have him. I'm throwing the book. I'm so excited. We have him. We have our main female, who I believe her name is Mary. Yes. And she has been widowed. And so she has a son who's like, by the end of this book, I think he's in like his preteen age. She's been hurt in the past by her husband, so she looks at marriage differently, all those kinds of things. But of course they have attraction from the get-go, and they can't stand the fact that they have attraction, and misunderstanding after misunderstanding, all that stuff. Shouldn't work. Loved it. So I'm really glad that I finished this book. I don't know why, but just something about the last day. I had like half of this book left. I think I only had like 3 hours of the audiobook, and I said, you know what, I'm feeling it, I'm gonna do it. And I did it, and this is what I ended the month with. Did I tell you I got 4 stars? I think so. It was great. I loved it. I don't know why, but I loved it. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. And that's it. That's a look at all of the books that I finished in the month of July. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in today's video. As always, I want to know your thoughts on them if you've read any of them. Or tell me something that you read in the month of July if you want to rave or rant. I'm always here. And if you want to comment something but you're not sure what to comment because I'm drinking coffee, put a little coffee mug or tea, if you were a tea person, put a little drink down below. Whatever you're feeling. But I think that's all I've got for you guys today, so I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links, so check all that out, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!